The year was 1412. France was deep in the 100 Years' War against England. In a small village of Domremy, a peasant girl was born into a humble family. She could neither read nor write, yet she held a profound devotion to the Catholic Church and its teachings. Her name was Joan of Arc. Joan lived a simple life with her parents until the age of 13. One day, in her father's garden, she claimed to have seen a vision and heard a voice. She identified it as Saint Michael the Archangel, who told her to be a good girl, obey her mother, and attend church often. This was only the beginning, however. More visions followed soon after. St. Catherine of Alexandria, St. Margaret of Antioch, and St. Michael returned again and again. Their message grew stronger with time, and eventually, Joan was told to save France from the English and help the Dauphin, the future King Charles VII, reclaim his throne. As part of her now divine mission, Joan took a vow of chastity and even convinced a local court to rule against her father's attempt to arrange a marriage for her. In May 1428, at the age of 16, Joan travelled to Vaucouleurs, one of the last remaining strongholds still loyal to the Dauphin. She sought an audience with Robert de Baudricourt, a local garrison commander, to gain support for her mission. Initially, Baudricourt dismissed her, but Joan remained steadfast. When she returned in early 1429, news of her determination and claims had spread, and Baudricourt finally relented, granting her passage to the Dauphin in Chinon. Dressed in men's clothing as a practical disguise for her journey, Joan arrived at the royal court on February 1429. To test her, Charles hid among his courtiers, but Joan immediately identified him, declaring her divine mission. How could a simple peasant girl, with no prior knowledge of the court, instantly recognize the heir to the throne in disguise? To her, the answer was simple. God had guided her. Many saw this as proof that Joan was truly sent by God, for how else could she accomplish such a feat? This encounter led to weeks of theological scrutiny, after which Charles' advisors concluded that he should listen to her. With Charles's approval, Joan set out with a small army to relieve the besieged city of Orleans. Clad in white armor and riding a white horse, she personally led the charge to deliver much-needed supplies and reinforcements, inspiring the French forces to rally. Her presence and unwavering conviction reinvigorated the resistance, ultimately leading to the English retreat and a decisive victory for the French. Military strategists had predicted the city's fall, yet, against all odds, a teenage girl with no formal training led the French to an overwhelming victory. To the French, this was nothing short of a miracle. How could a teenage girl, untrained in war, turn the tides of battle where seasoned commanders had failed. Following this miraculous triumph, Joan's reputation spread rapidly. Though she never wielded a weapon in battle, she rode alongside her troops as a symbol of divine inspiration, carrying a banner instead of a sword. Finally, as foretold by her visions, on July 17th that same year, Charles VII was crowned King of France, with Joan kneeling at his feet. In May 1430, King Charles VII ordered Joan to defend Compiègne against the Burgundians, French allies of England. Despite her efforts, she was thrown off a horse and left outside the town as its gates closed, leading to her capture. In the trial that followed, Joan faced around 70 charges, later reduced to 12, including witchcraft, heresy, and violating divine law by dressing as a man. To distance himself from the controversy, the king made no effort to negotiate for her release. Finally, on May 30th, the following year, at the age of 19, after months of grueling interrogations and proceedings, Joan was condemned as a heretic and a witch. She was convicted and burned at the stake in the old marketplace of Rouen. Even in the flames, however, Joan did not scream, with her final words being, "Jesus, Jesus." Some witnesses claimed they saw a dove rise from the fire as she was burning. It was as if, even in her death, the divine remained by her side. Years later, in 1456, King Charles VII ordered a posthumous retrial, which cleared Joan of all charges and recognized her as a martyr. She was later canonized as a saint by Pope Benedict XV on May 16th, 1920. Joan of Arc's story is just one of many tales of divine intervention, or as it is often called, Deus Ex Machina, God from the machine. Her story embodies the very essence of this concept, an otherworldly force tipping the scales when all seemed lost. Joan's story, however, is not the only instance of such intervention. One of the most famous biblical accounts demonstrates this concept clearly, though arguably the Bible is filled with them. Moses, the chosen leader of the Israelites, led his people out of Egypt after a series of devastating plagues, forcing the Pharaoh to release them. But their freedom was short-lived. Filled with regret and fury, the Pharaoh sent his armies to recapture them, turning their triumphant exodus into a desperate race for survival. With the Red Sea before them and the Pharaoh's chariots thundering behind, the Israelites found themselves trapped. There was no escape. Desperation filled the air. But then, Moses, following divine instruction, raised his staff, and a powerful wind began to blow. The sea split apart, forming towering walls of water on either side and a dry path in between. The Israelites rushed across, their lives hanging by a thread. And just as the last of them reached safety, Moses stretched out his hand once more, and the waters crashed back down, swallowing the Egyptian forces whole. A miraculous intervention at the most critical moment, shifting the course of history. What should have been the end for the Israelites became their deliverance. A hopeless situation turned on its head, not by human hands, but by a force beyond comprehension, an undeniable instance of divine intervention. However, both these examples are rooted in distant history, one from the 15th century and the other from ancient times. But instances of these sudden, almost otherworldly interventions are not just confined to the past. In 1940, World War II had reached a critical turning point. Nazi Germany's Blitzkrieg had swept across Europe with terrifying speed, overwhelming Poland, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Now, France was on the verge of collapse. The German forces, highly coordinated and relentless, had encircled the Allied troops, forcing them into a desperate retreat. Nearly 400,000 British and French soldiers found themselves stranded on the beaches of Dunkirk, trapped between the advancing German army and the vast expanse of the English Channel. With no way to fight back and no clear path to escape, what seemed inevitable was either surrender or complete and utter annihilation. For days, the situation grew more dire. German bombers filled the skies, relentlessly pounding the trapped Allied forces. The beaches, once a place of retreat, had become a death trap. Ammunition was dwindling, morale was plummeting, and every passing hour brought a certainty of annihilation closer. The British High Command debated their options. Should they surrender? Attempt a suicidal last stand? The Royal Navy had begun assembling ships for an evacuation, but the logistics were nightmarish. The harbour was unusable, and large vessels couldn't reach the shallow beaches to rescue the men. The Germans, sensing their inevitable victory, tightened the noose. It seemed only a matter of time before the final blow would be struck. And then the unthinkable happened. For reasons still debated to this day, Adolf Hitler ordered his forces to halt their advances for 48 crucial hours. This inexplicable pause gave the British and French forces a sliver of hope. But even with this unexpected reprieve, evacuation still seemed impossible until nature itself intervened. The English Channel, known for its violent, unpredictable waters, suddenly calmed. A rare period of unusually smooth seas made the treacherous crossing far more manageable. As if guided by fate, an armada of over 800 vessels, navy ships, fishing boats, merchant vessels, and even private yachts, set sail from Britain in what would be called Operation Dynamo. These so-called little ships of Dunkirk braved enemy fire, weaving through strafing runs from the Luftwaffe to rescue the stranded soldiers. Yet, The miracles did not stop there. A dense, low-hanging fog rolled in, shielding the men on the beaches from German aircraft. Bombing raids, which had been relentless just days before, were now far less effective. The Luftwaffe's pilots, struggling with poor visibility, failed to deliver the devastating blow that should have sealed the Allies' fate. Against all odds, day by day, ship by ship, men were ferried across the channel. By the time the evacuation ended on June 4th, over 338,000 soldiers had been rescued. What should have been a massacre had instead become a moment of survival so profound that Prime Minister Winston Churchill called it a miracle of deliverance. Dunkirk was not a victory in the traditional sense. The Allies had abandoned tanks, weapons, and equipment, retreating in the face of an overwhelming enemy, and yet it was not a defeat either. Against all logic, against all odds, hundreds of thousands of men escaped annihilation. What should have been the end of the war for Britain became its turning point that kept the fight alive. A last stand turned into a second chance. A hopeless situation reversed, not by strategy alone, but by a series of improbable, almost impossible events, ones that many would call nothing short of divine intervention. We have gone through a few stories of Deus Ex Machina, ranging from ancient times up to as recently as World War II. In moments like these, it leaves little room for doubt. When all seems lost, when logic dictates defeat, yet something beyond comprehension shifts the tide. Whether seen as divine intervention or an uncanny twist of fate, these events echo the very essence of Deus Ex Machina. But perhaps what makes these moments so compelling isn't just the miraculous nature of their occurrences. It's their timing. They arrive at the brink of disaster, at the final, desperate hour, when the odds have long since collapsed. They remind us that history isn't always dictated by sheer power or human effort alone. Sometimes something else steps in, something inexplicable, something unstoppable. And whether one wants to believe in providence, fate, or mere coincidences, one thing remains certain. When the impossible becomes reality, the world remembers. Thank you for watching.